Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on emotional intelligence. My name is John Wright, and I'm the President and Managing Director here at the Canadian Management Centre, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Today's session is on the topic of emotional intelligence, and the agenda we're going to walk you through this afternoon in the next 55 minutes or so is a brief introduction of who the Canadian Management Centre is. That'll be followed by instructions on how to participate with the webinar today using Twitter. Next up, we will then go to some background information. And one of the things that we love to do is have you get involved with the presentation today. So there's an opening poll question that I'm going to be asking you in about 4 slides from now. After we've gotten that information, I'm going to give you a bit of background to set the stage for today's topic, and then I'll be turning the virtual podium over to Peter Taylor, who's going to take us through his presentation on emotional intelligence. So if you're new to the Canadian Management Centre, this may be maybe your first webinar with us. We have a lot of new folks here on the webinar today. Just one slide with a few points of background. First and foremost, we are what I call a training and learning company. We're multidisciplined and we deliver in multimodalities. And by that I mean multidisciplined. We have courses that we teach both in open enrollment programs and in our customized on-site delivery programs that cover everything from project management to communication skills training and of course to leadership training at all levels of the organization. When I use the phrase multimodalities, I mean simply that we offered it in a number of different ways. Open enrollment programs, customized on-site, blended learning delivery, virtual seminars. We have webcasts and podcasts for you and much, much more. Now, another thing that people may not know about the Canadian Management Centre is that although we are Canadian and we're headquartered in Toronto, we're actually part of a global network, and that is the American Management Association Global Network, which has over 18 countries and gives us access to global content and global delivery. And through that, we will leverage their best information assets in the classroom, but also use our global network to deliver content outside of Canada when needed as part of global learning initiatives. The other thing I'd like you to know about the Canadian Management Centre is that, in fact, we're actually a not-for-profit or an NFP organization, but we are an NFP with a mission. And our mission is we build inspired partnerships that prepare the next generation of leaders to thrive in tomorrow's marketplace. And those inspired partnerships really relate to the types of relationships we're looking to build with the participants in our classrooms, as well as the companies that send them and the companies that we do customized on-site work with. The other advantage to being a not-for-profit organization is that the proceeds that we do make, we actually invest right back into our products and our client solutions. So that's a little bit of background on the Canadian Management Centre. Now you can participate today. If you're a person who loves to use Twitter, we invite you to use Twitter with us and tweet us during the event today. Simply use #CMC events. Give us your thoughts, comments, questions as we go along through this afternoon. And just understand that by tweeting, you'll also be entering to win one of our CMC prize packs. And I would ask that you would participate with us and tweet us prior to 2:30 so that we can count your tweet in the contest. Now, after today's session, you will receive an email from us. It will give you a link to a recording of today's session on emotional intelligence. If you're someone who is in the mode of claiming PDUs, it'll also give you the claiming instructions to do that. It'll also direct you to incremental resources related to today's topic that you'll be able to find on our website, which is cmcoutperform.com. Now, I mentioned before about an opening poll question, and so I'd like to get started. So if you are ready, here we go. The question is your interest in the topic of emotional intelligence today more for your own self-knowledge and personal development, or are you here to learn more about it for your life outside of work? Are you here to learn more about emotional intelligence because you know someone at work that it might apply to? Or are you thinking about emotional intelligence as it relates to your immediate team at work? Or maybe you're the person who's responsible for these types of development initiatives inside your organization as a whole. So I'm going to give you about 1 minute to fill out the poll, and if you could pick one of those answers, that would help myself and Peter Taylor to understand a little bit more about why you're actually here on the webinar today. And while you're taking that minute to answer, I'm just going to ask Peter, you've got people in the classroom all the time, you're teaching this topic all the time. What kinds of answers do you get from people in your classroom of why they're so interested in this topic?
I would think all 5, John. It's interesting. I find people who clearly are looking at number 1, the self-knowledge and personal development, and that's high on their agenda. There are others who sometimes have been encouraged to attend the program without perhaps knowing exactly what the outcome is meant to be for them, other than they're out of the workplace for a couple of days trying to pick up some new ideas. So I think the whole range, I would say probably number 1 would be the highest, but certainly a smattering across the other 4 as well.
Okay, so let's see how we're doing. So self-knowledge seemed to be the largest, and then followed by your immediate team. Okay, great. So thanks for participating, and again, that just gives myself a bit of insight and Peter a little bit of insight of why you're here today. So thanks for filling out that poll. And just so you know, there are a number of other poll questions that Peter will be asking you as he goes through his section. Now, when we do these webinars, I always like to ask the question, why did we even pick this topic at the Canadian Management Centre? Why do we think it's an important topic for today? And I don't know if it's like this in your organization, but we certainly are hearing people saying consistently that the whole theme of the past 3-4 years, do more with less, is getting very tired. In fact, the workforce is getting very tired. They're getting tired of hearing that phrase. They're also just getting tired because they're just consistently being asked to do more with less. And so what the conversation needs to switch to is a drive for organizational growth, and that requires innovation. And that requires effective leadership. So those things connect because the best leaders, we've observed over decades now, the best leaders harness their EQ over their IQ alone. And the good news is EQ, unlike IQ, can actually be learned and developed. And some of what Peter's going to share with you this afternoon will take you down that path and give you some early insights about how you can become more self-aware about your emotional intelligence and how you can start to harness it and be more effective as a leader by really thinking through your emotional intelligence rather than just your IQ alone. Now, when you think about leadership success, emotional intelligence is very important. This research by Daniel Goleman showed that emotional intelligence is actually twice as important as IQ and technical skills in making it up the ladder inside an organization. So quick, straightforward, the higher up you go, the more important your emotional intelligence becomes. This research as well was very interesting. This was a survey of 300 top-level executives. And based on interviews with them, on average, close to 90% of their success in leadership was attributed to their ability to tap into their emotional intelligence. So no question, if you are a person who wants to be an effective leader at the level you're at today, or aspire to become a more senior leader inside your organization, tapping into your emotional intelligence is critically important for your success. The other thing it's important for is understanding emotional intelligence can actually help predict employee success. This research from the Hay Group showed that emotional intelligence is twice as important as cognitive abilities in predicting outstanding employee performance. And their particular study showed that more than 85% of star performance in top leaders actually related back to their own emotional intelligence level. So there's no question that emotional intelligence is incredibly important in today's workplace. So today's webinar actually leverages key concepts that are contained in the Leading with Emotional Intelligence course here at the Canadian Management Centre. Peter Taylor is one of our key instructors and teaches this course across Canada. Peter's one of our longest tenured instructors. He's been with us since 1986. He established his own consulting practice, which he travels worldwide. He established that back in 1984 and continues to today to provide private consulting work in addition to his classroom work, and works with private companies, public sector organizations, various levels of government, and not-for-profit organizations. So with that as background, it's my pleasure to turn today's seminar over to Peter Taylor. Peter?
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here and very excited about the time we have together here. Really what we're trying to do in the time we have is explore in a little more depth how successful professionals really take into account both their emotions and the emotions of the people around them as they try and engage people in the workplace and achieve the results that they are intended to achieve. What we want to look at here is this session being practical for you. And to that end, I'd like you to keep in mind some interesting research that talks about the value of focus. And what the research says is that high-performing people know very well what they're good at. They know their strengths. They leverage them very well. They also have identified what they need to work on. And with that clarity of their strengths and the areas they need to work on, in sessions like this, they're inclined to take 3 to 5 more times from it than somebody who is just there. So what I would ask you to do is just to take a moment or two, and in the next 13 seconds, identify the one person that you want to engage with more effectively after this webinar. I'll give you 13 seconds for that. Focus on one person you'd like to keep in mind as we go through this. All right, and I'll explain to you quickly why I picked 13 seconds. It's very much like breaks. If you're in a meeting and people said, let's take a 10-minute break, typically those run 15. I find that by using unusual numbers, 13, 7, 9, etc., people are much more inclined then to pay attention to the time and keep it clear in their heads because there's so much going on for them. So this agenda is very much about getting you to think back to your reality. That's the BTYR at the bottom there. I want to get you thinking a bit about content and process in communications, and I'll talk more about those in a moment or two. We're going to go from there to a definition of emotional intelligence and have that as the foundation for the balance of our comments. And we'll look at the components that we can cover in the time we have here. One of those is self-awareness. Second is self-management. What happens when I have a strong reaction to something that's going on around me? And the third will be social awareness. How attuned am I to what's happening with the people around me, in my team perhaps, in the broader organization, in the larger setting? And having done that, what we'll do is go back and do a quick review of the key points that I've covered, and then we'll take some questions. So we have now another poll. And what I'd like you to do, and we'll give you about 30 seconds for this poll, please, is to think about which element of communications does emotional intelligence influence or have the most effect on? So is it the content of the communication? Is it the process of the communication? Your third answer is, I don't know what you're talking about in the context of these two questions, these two terms, content and process. So please answer those. Very good. I appreciate the response there. And the group that has said that the greatest impact is on the process are absolutely right, because really the process is the how of the communications. The content itself is the what. It's the facts, it's the information we're trying to transmit, it's the particular technical issue we're trying to address. And what I think sometimes happens that detracts from people's ability to communicate effectively is they try and give people too much information. Research says 3 points max. Let people absorb the 3 points, and then if they're interested or if you have more to add, you can do so. Really be packaging your information in small chunks. It's really critical that we don't drown people, because as soon as the eyes start to glaze over, we've lost them. The majority of our points after that are going to go absolutely nowhere. So what we need to do is leave people saying, I want more information. And if people in their exchanges with you walk away saying, oh, she's interesting, she's got a lot to say, I'd really like to know more about his experience, then I think you have a much better chance of building that relationship that will in the long term help you. So that's the content piece. Let's move over to the process, and this is really the how. It's what happens as you and I are going through communications with each other. What's taking place? Does it feel comfortable to us? Does it feel awkward? How conscious are either, or ideally both of us, about the process of that communications? It's something that traditionally was looked at as the sort of soft side of communications or leadership. And in fact, people used to say that you know, this is the soft stuff and speak somewhat disparagingly of that. I love this quote from Roger Enrico because I think he has it absolutely right. He said, it's the soft skills that are the hard skills. And those are the skills that really focus on the process and developing the process so that we can be more effective. So we have a second poll now, and this is again to give me a little more background information. And this question asks you, what is at this point your level of knowledge about emotional intelligence? Some of you may have done a lot of reading around it, others may not. 10 is high. Please capture your answer in one of the 4 options available. Okay. Well, that's helpful. I can have a sense of the degree of knowledge that's there, and certainly I will target my comments keeping that information in mind. So thanks for taking the time to respond to that poll. So I want to give you a definition of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive and use one's emotions. It's really key that we are aware of them. So if you were to come up to me and say, Peter, you look concerned about something, that must not be a concern. I must know that first. And I think there are some people who are very much aware of how they're feeling at the time. There are others who are less so. And we'll talk a little bit more about self-awareness in a moment or two. We've also got to manage the connections with the people around us. The people around us are going through different things in their lives, different pressures, both in the work setting and outside the work setting. And we really need to take that into account as we try and make connections with them, communicate effectively, and exchange information with them. So emotional intelligence starts with me, very much about self-awareness, me knowing what's happening internally, and then as I have a picture of that, then I can begin to look out beyond me and see what might be happening for the people around me. So when we look at self-awareness, really what we need to recognize, and the importance of being self-aware, is recognizing that if we are not conscious of the emotional state we're in, it's very hard to focus. And what will happen is I get distracted so easily. I'm more concerned about something over here, whereas I need at this point to be focusing on something that's important to you and to us mutually. It really does block my ability to use my cognitive capabilities. In the program that John referenced earlier on, we look at how the brain functions, and we need to recognize that if the emotional state has aroused the amygdala, it's very, very difficult to concentrate on the facts and the information that's important to us here. We've got to be able to focus on the facts. We've got to also be factoring in what's happening for that other person. And so if I am, for example, presenting something to you and making a case to you, and I'm overly enthusiastic, you may not even be hearing the message. You're just conscious of, wow, he's passionate about this. Wow, he's feeling so strongly about this. And I may miss comments from you because you may think, nah, he's got his mind made up, and there's no point in adding in more comments here. So we've got to be constantly monitoring ourselves. And the metaphor that works best for me for doing that is to be able to get up in a helicopter and, number one, pay attention to me to see what kind of state I'm in. And then number two, obviously, we'll look later on, be scanning to see what's happening around me. And I'm scanning to see what's going on around me, both in terms of potential surprises that I think might happen, but also to see what kind of receptivity is being given to the message I'm trying to convey, am I getting the level of engagement I want? That's the kind of information I can get from that helicopter view, both from a personal perspective and also from the perspective of what's going on for the people around me. One of the things that can often affect our ability to focus, our ability to listen, is the environment obviously around us, But there's one that I want to mention here because I think it has such huge significance and typically doesn't get the sort of visibility it needs, and that is what we call the H.A.L.T.ed States. And those of you who have been around little children know the conditions typically under which they tend to make a fuss, cry, etc. And it's what we call HALT. Number one is they're hungry, and that's a real challenge. Number two, they may be angry. Something has happened and they're feeling angry, they're feeling perhaps neglected, they're feeling left out, or it could be that they're just tired. And in those states, infants, young children, tend to act out very significantly. Now, that's true, I think, also for adults. Because frankly, I don't think from an emotional perspective, adults in the workplace are any different than children with longer legs. They have the same pulls, they have the same needs to be satisfied. If they're tired, they're less willing to consider other opinions. If they're hungry, some of them are not able to focus. In fact, I have one client I work with that if we're going into a meeting to discuss anything of any seriousness, I'll often, a couple of hours ahead of time, just say, by the way, have you eaten? We're meeting at 1, and I just want to make sure you've had something to eat, because I know there'll be a difference in that person's performance with food in their belly. It just makes a huge difference. So we look at self-awareness, and what we're really wanting to look at here is paying attention to our physiology. We need to be attuned to our body, because if I'm not clear about what's going on physically for me, then I may not take the time to explain to you what my intention is for what I'm saying, what I'm trying to do. And that often triggers stronger reactions in others, because if they don't know what we're trying to do or why, then they start sometimes to make up reasons, or they think there's no logic to this because I've never explained it to them. So it's important that we pay attention to our body. One of the things that I do in some of the work that I'm involved with is to use biofeedback, because our bodies react in 85 milliseconds to what's going on around us. It's almost instantaneous. And if we are attuned to that physiological reaction, then we're ahead of the game. We're that much further along in saying something's changing, yet unidentified, and yet we need to be somewhat on guard, somewhat conscious of conditions about to change. One of the other ways to become more self-aware, I really think, is through the use of 360-degree feedback. And if you've had an opportunity to use feedback that way, the 360, where you go out to a group of people and ask them for their perceptions of how you interact with them, how you deal with others, it can be very, very rich. Very rich, and I think that's another way of becoming more self-aware, is through the use of 360. Now, the one comment I'll make to that is, remember, if you get feedback through a 360, and some of those things you may react strongly to, this isn't a reflection of you as a person. It's a reflection of how you're behaving and how other people experience your behavior. So it's not questioning who you are. It's just saying you might want to look at approaching things somewhat differently in order to be more effective. And this really takes me to this other point, that other people don't care about our intentions. What they're more interested in is our impact. That's what they experience, is our impact. And so I really need to be, number one, expressing what my intention is to others, and then making sure that what they're experiencing is consistent with that intention. Because without that, people are going to purely go on what they experience and the impact that they have. Now, one of the other formulas that we use sometimes in looking at self-awareness is what I call the SBI, and some of you, again, may have been exposed to that. And this is one of the ways that we can gain more self-awareness. It's also the way that we can begin to help others with us that we work with perhaps become more conscious of their impact. And the S is all about the situation. Here's what I just saw, or here's what I just heard. The B is about the behavior. I saw you, heard you, raise your voice at that person, or I think you were talking so quietly they might not have been able to hear you. And the I is the impact. I don't know whether you realize the effect that had. So it may have been that it shut people down, or it may have been that people weren't aware of the point you were trying to make. So the SBI, situation, behavior, impact model, is one way that we can have other people become more aware of their self and their impact. It's also one that we can use with people that we deal with. I strongly encourage you to, even though it seems repetitious, repeat what your intention is. I think the times that I don't, or the times that I regret, I think I never really did explain to them why this was so important to me. And without that understanding, it's unlikely I'm going to get their support. And that was the SBI. So the self-management, what we've got to recognize is that the only thing that's really important is our behavior. That's what people will make decisions, judge us by. And what I don't want to try and do is manage my emotional state. That doesn't make sense. My emotions are there to keep me on my toes. In our more primitive state, they were there to help me stay alive around threats, etc. What I really want to manage, and what you're most concerned about, is my behavior. And so that's what I need to be constantly monitoring, is my behavior. I want to anticipate when I'm going into a meeting with somebody what my reaction might be if they say certain things, what their reaction might be if this becomes news to them that they didn't have before. So much, I think, of beginning to build more effective relationships and use emotional intelligence is about anticipation, both anticipating my reaction if somebody were to say X to me, and begin also to anticipate what their reaction might be when I give them the news that I have to provide. So it's sort of forewarned is forearmed. Looking at our reactions, anticipating ours, and anticipating theirs. Preparation is everything. What I don't want to do is all of a sudden find myself like a deer with the headlights, with no notion of what they're talking about or the point they're trying to make, when there probably was opportunity for me to have done some preparation. So that might be preparation, saying, okay, what are the what ifs? And this is, I think, part of project management. It's anticipating so that we're prepared in case of the contingencies. It's also sometimes laying some groundwork. So it might be saying to somebody, I need to talk to you about this, and here's why I need to talk to you about it, so that when we get there and have that conversation beginning, it's not a surprise. One of the other things I think is important, too, is to wherever we can, present our message in the context of what the organization says is important. So John started this off saying, here's CMC's mission. Organizations need to be clear about their mission, what their values are, the behaviors that are acceptable. And the more you can package messages within that context, the easier it is for people to understand it. Not necessarily accept, at least understand it. So what we need to do is slow down. And when I say hurry slowly, what I mean is literally take a deep breath, take another deep breath if I need to before I respond to a comment. I think sometimes counting to 10 can be very helpful, and I remember hearing that as a child growing up. Count to 10, and then you can begin to make your comments. At the very least, I need to start, as we'll talk in a moment or two, doing some paraphrasing to give you evidence that I've understood what you said in the way that you intended me to. That's really, really, really key here. In terms of a sort of slowing down, one of the people I met with recently was saying that their formula for slowing down, and the scenario being somebody has said something and obviously this person is expected to respond, but rather than leaping in, he said, sometimes when I have a very strong reaction, and the technical people like this, he said, I start to solve pi. And he said, I sometimes get to 6 or 8 decimal places before I think, okay, now I'm prepared to engage and go on. But I need something like that to distract me to regain control of things before I move on. What I also want to do in terms of self-management is get to their side of the bridge. And what I mean by that is begin to see their perspective. Because if I can see their perspective and acknowledge to them that I've seen it, that's reinforcing for them in terms of here's somebody who's interested. It also gives me an opportunity to say, what might common connections be here? What might be the linkages between the kinds of things that are important to them and the kinds of things that I think are important? So the more I can get to their side of the bridge, the better off I am, the more likely it is that I'll be able to make a good, thorough connection. Those of you who spend time in stores, and most of us do at one time or another, know that good salespeople listen more than talk. And it's all about them beginning to understand some of the things that we might think are important, to then be able to say, yep, I can help you, or no, this is where you need to go to get the help you need. So to get to their side of the bridge, I go back up in another helicopter, and I'm starting to look at things again, from whatever vantage point I can to get some insight into the challenges that people are facing. I want to move from there to a little more about self-management and tying back to what I talked about in terms of slowing things down. Paraphrasing is a wonderful technique. And I'm not talking parroting here. I'm not going to take your words and put them back to you exactly as you said them, because that's just sort of memory and spitting it out without perhaps any indication of understanding. But the paraphrasing is sometimes having to interrupt somebody to say, I need to interrupt you here for a minute to make sure I've understood what you've said so far, and this is what I think you've said so far. And in a face-to-face encounter, obviously I've got that visual feedback. I can see your face, your head perhaps nodding to confirm that I got it the way you intended, or you're pulling back a little bit, which might indicate that I've totally misunderstood what you've said. I need that feedback. If we're doing things online, if we're doing things remotely, it's much harder to get that feedback. So conference calls that I'm part of, you know, if there's a lag, I may say, sounds to me as if there's something here that we need to clarify before we go on. Give the other person time to absorb the question, think about it, and then come back and say, you're right, there's something here that I haven't understood, and I want to be more clear about that. So the paraphrasing and the active listening are really key techniques to be using. They also give us time to think. So when I'm paraphrasing what you're saying, it's also giving me an opportunity to begin perhaps to say, all right, you know, what makes sense? What is it I might need to explore more, and where can I contribute to this discussion in a constructive way? That's one of the tools we can use. Another tool that I really like in the context of self-management that I believe has huge impact in terms of building relationships is what we call empathy. And as I suspect you already recognize, empathy is about listening to other people. The 3 L's is an interesting technique to use because it very specifically lays out a pattern to follow. So I want to listen. We've talked about that. I want to interrupt to clarify if I need to. What I think sometimes happens at this point is that because I'm busy, I've got a lot going on, I'm very, very pulled in multiple directions. As soon as I have listened to you and got from you confirmation that I've understood it the way you intended, bang, I'll give you the solution. Well, you should try this. Have you thought about that? Go and see so-and-so. So I go from listening to solution. And that misses the second stage of the 3 L's of empathy. And the second stage is where we make the linkages with people, and it's about labeling. So it sounds to me as if you're excited about this. I get a sense that you're a little concerned about this, or that you're really passionate about it, or that you're downright angry about this. And again, I'm not trying to be accusatory here. What I am trying to do is give people clear evidence that I'm tuned in to the emotional state that they might be experiencing. So I've heard the person through, I've given them evidence I've understood. Sounds to me as if you feel strongly about this, Peter. And this is me in my role-playing mode here. Yes, I do. I feel strongly about it because. And so all of a sudden I may be getting more information than I had before, which then makes that connection with the individual. We then move to the solution, which is, all right, so what are your options? What do you think we could do here? And ideally, I want them coming up with the solutions, because the more they realize they have solutions to the issues they encounter, the more confident they're going to become. It's very much about helping people help themselves in the long run by developing that sense of, hey, I know a lot more than I sometimes think I do. So that's the 3 L's of empathy. It's listen, label, and that's the comment on what you perceive the other person to be experiencing at an emotional level, and then moving to the problem solving, the solution phase, in which we're saying, all right, options, what are they? What might we do with this? Got to remember that it's all about them when we start talking about empathy. And I've sadly encountered some situations, and I suspect some of you may have as well, where somebody has expressed some difficulties, some challenges, they've had a loss or something else, and somebody else who's trying to be supportive begins to say, well, I went through that too. You've got to recognize that nobody cares at this point. about what you went through. It's that person who may at this point be grieving, maybe, disturbed about something that's happened or really passionate about something. Empathy is not about trying to say, I've been there, done that, because I don't think that's helpful. Somewhere down the road, I might come back and say, by the way, if you're interested, I went through something that sounds a little similar, and if you're interested in my experience, I'd be happy to tell you what I did or what I thought about at that time. But to be leaping straight into, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I went through that 5 years ago. Nobody cares. And there's one horrendous example of what empathy isn't, and I suspect a number of you recall this. It's so vivid for me. This is Tony Hayward of BP. There's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. I'd like my life back. That was the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I can't think that there were a lot of people in that general area who were really terribly interested about what Mr. Hayward's concerns were. They knew their life had been changed probably forever, and to hear somebody else saying, well, yeah, I really want to get back to the way things were as well, was of no interest to them whatsoever. So we've talked a little bit about self-awareness, and I've talked a bit about self-management. Let's take a look at social awareness. And what we're talking about here is even more exploration of what's going on at their side of the bridge. And it is about getting back up into the helicopter again to see what's going on over there. Really need to be paying attention to the nonverbal data. So if I'm talking to you and I get a sense that there's something that's on your mind, rather than saying you're not listening to me, what I might say is, my impression is there's more here than meets the eye. And then I need to shut up to see whether you respond to that comment or, no, everything's fine, would say to me there's something more here than perhaps you have admitted to me. So I want to be paying attention to those nonverbal bits of data. This is where I clarify my perception. And I'm really trying to make sure that my perception is accurate. So if you are very annoyed about something, I'd rather know that, because then I can begin to take that into account as I try and engage with you and communicate with you. So that's a really key piece of, again, not being accusatory and putting people on the spot or having them feel attacked, but certainly about paying attention to the information that's there. So I'll comment on those impressions very comfortably. I used to do that when I was selection interviewing. I used to make notes about nonverbal behavior and some of the candidates I was looking at. And then, when I went back a day or two later to look at and compare candidates, I'd be looking at my note that said, this person seemed pretty confident, comfortable. This person seemed a little agitated. But I thought, that's so arrogant. Here am I interpreting other people's nonverbal behaviors. It makes much more sense that I draw attention to what I'm seeing and leave it to the other person to either say, yeah, I am excited about this interview because I haven't had one for a while, or no, everything's fine, which to me would probably sound as if they were not giving me the full truth. So social awareness is about getting in the helicopter, seeing what's happening on their side of the bridge, paying attention to cues that may just give us some insights into what may be happening for that other person. So I want to now sort of pull together some of the key things that I think are important to avoid in our communications with others. And these are things that, again, without intention, may distract people from the communication that we're trying to have with them or the focus we're trying to get. And I think there are a number of expressions that tend to do exactly that. So over the years, I've accumulated some of these, and I'm going to share a few with you here. I think if somebody comes to me and says, let me be honest with you, that's not a good start. Because when somebody talks about honesty, to me, that's a given. And I trust that you're going to be honest with me until I know that not to be the case. And for you to raise the question of honesty, puzzling to me. So it may distract me from the message that you're trying to convey. And again, not your intention, just the impact of it. Trust me on this, Peter. My little red light flickers when I hear trust me, because I think, yeah, I do trust people until I know I can't. And so the fact that you're bringing up trust, I'm finding this a little distracting because I hadn't even thought about that in this particular conversation that we're having here. It's just my opinion. I cringe when I hear myself say that because I think it undermines my opinion. This is my opinion. You may have a different one. I may say, whoops, you're right. I think you got a better idea. But for me to be prefacing my comments by saying it's just my opinion, I don't think adds strength to my comment or increases the likelihood that I'm going to persuade you to take me seriously on that. I don't disagree with your suggestion. I've never quite figured out what that means. It sounds like somebody sitting on a picket fence, which is kind of uncomfortable sometimes. They don't want to go left. They don't want to go right. You know, if they need more time to think about it, then just say, I'm not prepared to respond to this particular suggestion at this point or your point at this point. I need some more time to think about it, and I'll get back to you in 2, 4, 6, 8 hours tomorrow morning, whatever the case is. But I don't disagree. Says there's uncertainty. Why don't you just voice that? And the last one is my favorite. Don't take this personally. And actually somebody the other day said that to me, and I felt comfortable enough to say to them, well, if it's not personal, please go and talk to the person to whom it belongs. Because as soon as you're talking to me, it's personal. And I think that preface is used very often when people try to say, you know, calm down, I'm going to give you some information here that you may not like to hear, and yet I need to give it to you. I don't think that's helpful. If there's something that you need to talk to me about that you think could possibly be disruptive, then tell me that. You know, Peter, there's something I need to talk to you about, and I'd like you to hear me through before you react to it, because there's some points here that I think are really important. So again, I've laid out my context. I've given the person the clarity of my intention. It is personal. There's no question about that. So it doesn't make sense to be saying it isn't. A couple of quick triggers that I cringe when I hear, and I hear them too often, the buts and the howevers. If somebody says something and you have some other comments to add, I really do suggest you substitute and. Get rid of the buts, get rid of the howevers. It's an interesting idea, and rather than saying it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it'll fly with the budget, it's an interesting idea, and I need to see a business case in order to see if we can take this forward and make it fit into this year's budget. So it's always building on people's ideas. Sometimes I came out of a human resources background, and sometimes people would be saying we're going to do this, and rather than saying you can't do that because it's counter to the agreement or counter to the regulations, I might be saying to them, yes, you can do it, and I want you to realize that we may end up in agreements, we may end up in arbitration, et cetera. So it's having people begin to realize the consequences of that particular behavior that I think is important. The other thing I would strongly suggest that you stay away from is giving people options when, had you made a statement, it would have had much more impact. So, you know, my simplest example around that goes back to children. Those of you who've been around children, young children, or have them right now, I learned very quickly that you never ask your kids if they want to go to bed now, because the obvious answer to that is, from a child, is no, I got other things to do, I want to finish this. So much more sense to say, I want you to go and get your pajamas on, brush your teeth, get a book, I'll read you a story in an assertive, direct, again, polite, respectful fashion. Much more likely we're going to get the outcome we want. We need to be assertive. We need to be direct. We need to be known as somebody who speaks his or her mind. Really key. So, summary of the tips. Invest in the process. I really do think it's key that we're aware of the best time to communicate with people. There's some people that are morning people, some people that are afternoon. As much as I can, if you're a morning person, I'll try and keep my important communication with you in that context. Need to be self-aware. We've talked about that. Don't manage your feelings. Use them as information to explore what's going on around you more, to get a sense of why perhaps you're reacting so strongly to something. It's our behaviors that are the things that other people are most interested in. Keep scanning for the reactions and the clues that are out there. When in doubt about what's going on, then I strongly suggest you express your impression, and then the SU is shut up. Just stop, listen, let the other person absorb what you've said, and then you can decide where to go from there. They may need more information. We need to be quiet to let them absorb our question and then move from there to perhaps coming back with a question that they might have. The final thing I'd ask you to think about in terms of building those relationships is that Shimli Botich talks about this in Shalom in the Home, and he said, you know, what emanates from the heart penetrates the heart. And if people know you're sincere, if people know that your intentions are good, and you keep reminding them of your intentions, it's amazing how much more they will tolerate if we slip a little bit. If they don't think we care about them, then clearly, why should they care about us? So the law of reciprocity is huge. If people get a sense we care about them, it's much more likely that they will care about us. So those are the key things that I wanted to talk about today. And as John said earlier on, the program in November, the Leading with Emotional Intelligence, we get into these in a lot more detail and love to explore those with you if you're able to join us then. We've got a final poll, and then I'm going to turn it back to John to see what sort of questions might have arisen. And the final poll is all about the practicality of our time this afternoon. We've had about 38 minutes together, and I'd like to know how many ideas you got that you felt were practical for you. So if you could answer 0, 1, 2, 3, or more than 3, I would appreciate it.
And Peter, thanks very much for all the content this afternoon. Just to let people know, we had over 700 people on this afternoon's webinar, so we're absolutely thrilled at the turnout today. And while people are filling out poll number 4, Peter, just a couple of questions have come through already, and I'd suggest to people if they want to submit a question, we've got about 9 to 10 minutes of time where Peter and I can help answer anything that's come up on today's webinar. A couple of just recaps of things that you've chatted about today. If you could just repeat the actual definitions for SBI, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. The SBI is situation. I want to describe the situation so the person has the context. The B is the behavior. So I want to say, I saw this, I heard this, I didn't see this, I didn't hear what I thought I would hear. And the I is the impact. I don't know whether you realize the impact that had. And it might be a positive impact because somebody did something and we're delighted, or it might be, I don't think that's the kind of impact I'd like to see around here in future in this situation. So situation, behavior, impact.
Terrific. Second question was, if you could just talk a little bit more. There's definitely a lot of interest around the 3 L's of empathy. And yes, if you could put in maybe just a few more comments around the whole area of labeling.
Well, labeling I think of as picking up on the nonverbal clues that are there and not trying to interpret them myself, but rather to say, here's what I think I'm seeing or hearing, to see if the other person is willing to give me some insights into what's happening for them. So my impression is that you are concerned about this. Now, somebody might say, nope, not concerned. That's probably something I'd want to probe more because I have a sense that they are concerned. Somebody who says, yes, I am concerned, then that sort of opens the door for me to understand a little bit more about what's leading to that concern. And again, so it's the labeling is labeling the impression I have of the state the person's in. Excited, angry, sad, really passionate about something.
Great. You covered 3 really fundamental pillars today: self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. The course that you lead here on emotional intelligence, I'm just curious, is there any common theme of which one of those areas people in that course have to develop the most, or is it really much person-specific?
My quick answer would be the latter, that it's person-specific, and yet I think I would also lean towards saying self-awareness. I think an awful lot of people are moving at such a pace, and it goes back to your, doing more with less kind of notion, that sometimes we don't realize the effect that pace is having on us. And one of the reasons that I say that is I use biofeedback quite a lot in the work I do, and I use what I call biodots, which are just galvanic skin response indicators. Some of you may remember mood rings. And those things change depending on my sort of state of relaxation or stress. And sometimes people put those on and they're picking up information that they really hadn't paid attention to before. They're just moving at such a pace, John. I just think sometimes they hit the wall before they realize that they're running into it.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that you mentioned as well is this whole idea of people are moving very quickly, but in addition, I'd say that there's, I'll call them intervening issues, which is in some cases distance. So how does some of the basic principles of emotional intelligence in these three areas of self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness, how does that come into play when you're dealing with mobile communications, email communications, teleconferences where you may not necessarily see the person on screen, or even what I'll call the screen distracted people, where you might even see them, but really they're not really there with you because they're worried about whatever screen they're looking at, be it BlackBerry or iPhone or computer. So just those two basic areas, distance of mobile and email, and then people who are more, like I said, distracted in front of you.
Well, I'll start with the first one, the distance one, and what I have found useful, and I do coaching internationally by telephone. I run national conference calls sometimes as well, and what I have found works is to talk about how we need people to engage, how we need people to be willing to say, you know, if they're frustrated with something or they're excited about something, start to verbalize that, because there isn't any face-to-face pickup available, because as you say, we're not dealing directly. So it's a matter of being willing to say, here's what I'm thinking. Email is the same thing. You know, if you're concerned about something, tell me, I'm concerned about this, John. You need to verbalize that, because I may not pick up the subtleties that I might pick up if you and I were face-to-face. So it's back to the process again. It's saying, if we're going to work effectively together, we need to acknowledge the process and invest in things that will allow us to clearly get from people as much understanding as we can of their take on situations, how they're feeling about things at the same time. So that's one of the things I think we need to look at doing more if we're you know, doing things at a distance. The social media becomes more challenging. I'm not a big lover of emoticons. I know some people use them. I'd rather you verbalize that. It's much more likely I'll understand it. But it is definitely much easier if we're face-to-face. I can pick up that nonverbal data much more readily. So I'm not sure I've answered your question as clearly as I'd like to, John.
Nope, those are fine. Those are fine, and these are questions that are coming through the chat window. And again, if you have any questions, please go to the chat window. We've got another 5 minutes or so where we can entertain questions, and I'm going to pass on a few more to Peter right now. One big bucket of questions is around this whole idea. Are there any gender differences when it comes to emotional intelligence, or are there generational differences when it comes to emotional intelligence?
I love the question. What the science says is that the way the human brain is wired is same regardless of gender. And from everything I've seen, I support that. What I think is different is the socialization. And one of the things that I focus on a lot is just how we sadly in sort of Western society have encouraged the males to sort of suck it up, you know, not to show the emotion because that's deemed to be weakness, and just realizing the hugely negative impact of that, both in terms of what they sometimes then do when everything explodes that they've been holding on to for so long. And we've just seen recent examples of that in Montreal and Germany. But I think it's also a matter of people beginning to feel more comfortable to verbalize their emotions and see that as respected by other people because they're dealing person to person. So no, there's no physical difference in terms of the way that the brain is wired in terms of emotions. Socialization plays a hugely negative part. Generationally, I think there's more receptivity now to talking about emotions in younger people than there is in, say, people of my generation, the baby boomers. I think that was, and again, that was a culturally impacted thing. So I think it's getting better, John. I think we've got a long way to go. We're seeing more emotional intelligence in the schools to deal with bullying, that kind of thing. So I think it's getting people more aware of the realities of emotional intelligence.
Okay. And I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of what I'm going to call rapid-fire questions for you. First one is, what EI assessment tools should people be considering to get some self-awareness about themselves?
Oh, great. Self-awareness, the self-administered one I use is called the Emotional Intelligence Appraisal, and I use that in the Leading with Emotional Intelligence program, and it has you step back and look at what you believe to be true about yourself. I love the tool. It's a useful one for that first step. If you want to go more broadly, then I like the EI 360, and that's where you go out to 15 other people or 20 other people and say, what have you seen me do or not do? And then you get that information back anonymously with comments about what might need to be developed and what might be strengths that are already there. So those two, the Emotional Intelligence Appraisal and the EI 360.
Great. Next rapid fire question is, where can I go to learn more about EQ?
Media Management Center. I would say
well,
Leading with Emotional Intelligence. What's that? I think it's a fabulous program. If you Google emotional intelligence, you will drown in information. There's so much out there. It's a field that has really exploded in the last 10 years. So I think you can Google, you can go to the CMC website. There's material there, and then certainly the program that's being offered, I would strongly recommend to you. There's lots of good information out there now.
Absolutely. And just to let people know, we've been talking about this course, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, and as you can see on your screen near the bottom, it's being held here in Toronto starting November 19th, and if you're interested in taking that course with Peter, that would be a great way to learn a lot more. The other thing you can do is you can also go to our website. Peter has written and posted articles in our website. You can just go to the search bar on our website, cmcoutperform.com. Just put Peter Taylor into the search bar and you'll get directed immediately to his articles. As I mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of chatter today on Twitter. Really appreciate that. You've got about another half hour if you want to tweet us on anything that you've learned or anything you've heard today. And by doing that, you'll be entered into our contest, and we'll be wrapping that up at 2:30. One thing I'd ask you to do is feedback. Feedback is hugely, hugely important to us. We want to find out about the quality of the experience that you had with us today, what you learned, but also any particular suggestions for future topics that you'd like us to hold on a webinar. We would love that. When you exit out of the WebEx screen today, you'll see a pop-up survey. Just take a few brief moments and fill that out. We would really appreciate you doing that for us. If you're a person who is claiming for a PDU as part of the Project Management Institute, you will receive an email in the next 24 to 48 hours. It will have full information about how to make that claim. And again, I hope you've gotten value out of today and one additional PDU. So with that, we're going to wrap up on time, right to the moment. We're excited to be able to have this webinar today, to have Peter available, and to talk through an important topic like emotional intelligence. Again, look for the follow-up email. It'll give you a link to the recording of today's session. And please visit us at cmcoutperform.com and go into that search bar and put Peter's name in and look for more information. So thank you for taking an hour out of your day to spend with us. Hope you got great value out of it and continued success. Cheers.
Thanks, John.